There's something about certain men that makes everyone pay attention. Not because they're loud, not because they're trying to impress, not because they're performing strength or success. It's something quieter, something that can't be faked, something that makes people stop and think, I want whatever he has. And when you ask people what it is, they struggle to name it. They say, he's confident, he's grounded, he's different. But those are just words trying to describe something they're feeling but can't articulate. What they're actually responding to is a specific attitude, a way of moving through the world that most men never develop. And the men who have it, they didn't stumble into it. They built it through years of doing something most men refuse to do. This channel is for the man who stayed strong when no one noticed, the man who carried responsibility quietly and slowly disappeared. Here, strength is questioned, silence is exposed, and the cost of being the strong one is finally spoken out loud. This attitude isn't charisma, isn't charm, isn't manipulation. It's something far more fundamental. And when a man embodies it, people don't just notice, they admire him without fully understanding why. Let me show you what this attitude actually is and why it creates admiration that nothing else can touch. The attitude is radical self-acceptance. Not arrogance, not confidence, not pretending he's perfect. Radical self-acceptance. The ability to stand in front of the world exactly as he is, with all his flaws, all his limits, all his humanity, and not apologize for any of it. Most men are performing a version of themselves they think the world will accept. They're hiding what they think is unacceptable, showcasing what they think is impressive, constantly adjusting based on who's watching. And people can feel that performance. It creates distance, not connection, impression, not admiration. But the man with this attitude isn't performing.
He's not trying to be anything other than what he is. He knows his flaws, and he's not hiding them. He knows his limits, and he's not pretending they don't exist. He knows his struggles, and he's not ashamed of them. And that radical honesty, that refusal to pretend, that willingness to just be human without apology, that's magnetic. Because most people are so busy performing, he's not trying to be anything other than what he is. He knows his flaws, and he's not hiding them. He knows his limits, and he's not pretending they don't exist. He knows his struggles, and he's not ashamed of them. And that radical honesty, that refusal to pretend, that willingness to just be human without apology, that's magnetic. Because most people are so busy performing that when they meet someone who's not, it's shocking, it's refreshing, it's something they didn't know they were hungered for until they saw it. Here's what this actually looks like in practice. He doesn't need to prove anything. Most men are constantly trying to prove their worth, prove they're smart, successful, capable, strong. They drop accomplishments into conversation. They position themselves strategically. They perform competence even when they're uncertain. But he doesn't do this, not because he has nothing to prove, but because he's not interested in proving it. His worth isn't up for debate. It's not conditional on your approval. It's not something he needs to defend or demonstrate. So when someone challenges him, he doesn't get defensive. When someone questions his decisions, he doesn't need to justify them. When someone doesn't recognize his value, he doesn't try to convince them. He just is who he is, and you either see it or you don't. Either way, he's fine. And that lack of need to prove anything, that comfort in his own skin without requiring validation, that creates admiration. Because people are so used to being around people who need their approval that someone who doesn't is disarming, in the best way. He's honest about what he doesn't know. Most men pretend to know things they don't. They fake expertise, they avoid admitting ignorance. They'd rather look foolish trying to bullshit their way through something than simply say, I don't know. But he doesn't do this. When he doesn't know something, he says it. No shame, no apology, just honest acknowledgement. I don't know.
I'm not sure. I haven't figured that out yet. And then he either asks questions or he moves on. And that honesty, that willingness to be a beginner, that comfort with not having all the answers, it's rare. Most people are so terrified of looking stupid that they never admit they don't know something. And that fear makes them smaller, not bigger. But he's not afraid of looking stupid because he's not performing intelligence. He's just being honest about his actual state of knowledge.
And people admire that because it gives them permission to be honest about theirs. He doesn't need to control how others see him. Most men are constantly managing their image. They're strategic about what they reveal, careful about what they admit, always aware of how they're being perceived. And that constant management is exhausting. It's also obvious. But he's not managing anything. He's not curating a version of himself for public consumption. He's not hiding the parts he thinks are unacceptable. He's not performing the parts he thinks are impressive. He's just showing up as he actually is and letting people see whatever they see. And that lack of image management, that refusal to perform, that willingness to be seen as flawed and human, it's powerful. Because when someone isn't trying to control how you see them, you trust what you're seeing is real. And real is what creates admiration. He admits when he's wrong. Most men would rather defend a bad position than admit they were mistaken. They argue, they justify, they twist logic to avoid saying, "I was wrong." Because in their mind, being wrong equals being weak, and they can't afford to look weak. But he doesn't operate from that fear. When he's wrong, he says it. Not with shame, not with excessive apology, just clear acknowledgement. I was wrong about that. I misunderstood. I made a mistake. And then he adjusts and moves on. And that ability to admit error without it destroying his sense of self, that's maturity. Most people can't do it because they've tied their worth to being right, but he hasn't. So he can be wrong and it doesn't threaten him. And people admire that because they're around so many people who can never admit fault that someone who can is like fresh air. He doesn't need to be the center of attention. Most men either crave attention or avoid it, but both are reactions to the same insecurity. Craving it because they need validation, avoiding it because they're afraid of judgment. Either way, attention controls them, but he's not controlled by it. He's comfortable being seen, and he's comfortable being invisible. He'll speak when he has something to say, and stay quiet when he doesn't. He doesn't need to dominate conversation, and he doesn't need to disappear from it. And that ease, that lack of need to either seek attention or avoid it, that comes from someone who's not performing for an audience. He's just present. And presence without performance is rare enough that people notice. He's the same person in every room. Most men change based on context. Different version at work, different version at home, different version with friends. And they think this is adaptability, but it's not. It's fragmentation. But he's consistent, not rigid, consistent. His core doesn't change based on who's watching. He's honest at work, honest at home, honest with strangers. His values don't shift to fit the room. His integrity doesn't adjust based on convenience. And that consistency, that refusal to be one person here and another person there, that creates trust. Because people know what they're getting with him. There's no performance, no hidden version, no wondering which version of him is real. He doesn't compare himself to others. Most men are constantly measuring themselves against other men. Am I more successful, less successful, ahead, behind, winning, losing? And that comparison is a trap because there's always someone ahead and someone behind. You're never satisfied. But he doesn't play that game. Not because he's better than others, but because he's not competing with them. He's on his own path, measuring himself against his own standards, focused on his own growth. Other men's success doesn't threaten him, and other men's failure doesn't validate him. And that lack of comparison, that ability to just be on his own path without needing to measure himself against others, that's freedom. And people admire freedom because most of them are trapped in comparison, and they can feel the difference. He doesn't need you to like him. Most men are people pleasers on some level. They adjust, accommodate, avoid conflict, say what people want to hear. Not out of kindness, out of fear. Fear of rejection, fear of disapproval, fear of not being liked. But he's not afraid of that. He's not trying to make everyone like him. He's not adjusting himself to fit your preferences. He's just being who he is. And if you like that, good. If you don't, also good. Your opinion doesn't determine his worth. And that lack of need for approval, that comfort with being disliked by people whose values don't align with his, that's power. Because when you don't need everyone to like you, you can be honest. And honesty is what creates real connection, not the shallow approval that comes from people-pleasing. He's comfortable with silence. Most men fill silence with noise. They talk when they don't need to, they explain when no explanation is required, they perform engagement even when they have nothing to contribute. Because silence feels uncomfortable, and they think filling it is their job. But he's comfortable with silence. He doesn't need to fill every gap in conversation. He can sit with people without needing to entertain them. He can be in a room without needing to prove his presence. And that comfort with silence, that lack of need to constantly perform engagement, it makes people comfortable too. Because when someone isn't desperately filling silence, you don't have to either. You can just be. He takes responsibility without excuses. Most men blame circumstances, other people, bad luck, anything to avoid taking full responsibility for their lives. And they do this because taking responsibility feels heavy. It means you can't blame anyone else. It means it's on you. But he takes full responsibility. Not with shame, not with burden, just with ownership. This is my life. These are my choices. These are my consequences. And if I don't like where I am, it's on me to change it. And that level of ownership, that refusal to play victim to circumstances, that creates respect. Because people are so used to being around people who blame everyone else that someone who takes full ownership stands out. So what creates the admiration? It's not one thing. It's the cumulative effect of all of this. It's a man who's so comfortable with who he actually is that he doesn't need to perform, prove, pretend, or apologize. He's just radically himself. And that radical self-acceptance gives everyone around him permission to be themselves too. People admire him not because he's perfect, but because he's honest. Not because he's got it all figured out, but because he's not pretending he does. Not because he never struggles, but because he doesn't hide when he is. The hero's journey isn't about becoming impressive. It's about becoming authentic. And authenticity without apology is what creates admiration that lasts. Most men are performing a version of themselves they think the world wants. And that performance might get attention, but it won't get admiration. Because admiration isn't for the performer.